Alrighty, to God be the glory. Jesus heals Tampa. I have a revelation that I want to share with people, and it's amazing. It's really something I've never heard before. I don't know if anybody else has. If you do, please leave a comment because I've heard a lot of different teachings on Genesis, but this is a mystery that shows what Jesus's mission was going to be and what he came to accomplish. And so I'm going to explain to you the mysteries in Genesis of the three twin births and what they represent. And at the end, I'll kind of tie it all together, but you really have to see the context of how this all plays out. And if you don't read extremely carefully, you won't even understand that what God is coming to do and why he's using twin births, because it really does play into the whole message. And I think shortly you'll understand. So turn in Genesis 4 and we'll start there. And in Genesis 4, it first talks about Cain and Abel and when Eve were to bear children. And it says, and Adam knew Eve, his wife, meaning they procreated and had and bare Cain, and she said, "I've gotten a man of the Lord." And again, she bare his brother. So you notice it didn't say, "And he went unto his wife again." It says, "And she bare." So it's like she bare a son, and then she bare another son. That is evidence that these were twins. And so, in case you didn't know that, that's kind of the evidence right there. And they were two distinctly different children. One was a tiller of the ground. One was one that raised animals. And again, it says in Genesis 4, and if you go into verse 5, and it says, "But Cain and his offering, he had no respect. But Abel's offering," in verse 4, the Lord had respect for Abel and his offering. So there was an immediate jealousy over that, because it shows that there was favoritism in one to the other. And if you notice, Cain was the older of the two. So this does play a significant role down the line, as you'll see, because the birthright in Jewish tradition, or in even King's tradition, was always the birthright went to the oldest, right? It always went to the oldest. So birthright is a very big play in this. And so you'll notice that obviously Eve kind of favored Cain because she said, "Oh, I got a man of the Lord." She never mentioned anything about Abel, which is very interesting. But then yet the Lord favored Abel. So you got this firstborn son, which was Cain, who was supposed to get the birthright. And that concept hadn't even yet come, because he was the first children of men. You know, we were the children of men, of God. We walked with God. Adam and Eve walked with God. And it was God's intention that we were to be sons of God at that moment. And so obviously Adam, being the firstborn, was the birthright. He was supposed to inherit the birthright, but because he sinned along with Eve and they fell, the devil was able to come in and steal what God had intended for man. And if you notice throughout these twin births, this is the struggle between, God and the devil, and what God set out to do for mankind. Because we, again, like I said, we are the sons of God. And if you notice in Romans 8 and stuff like that, it talks about we being the sons of God who walk in the Spirit, because, God came to reconcile what Adam and Eve messed up in the garden. And it took a long time to do that, obviously thousands of years. But what God came to do, Jesus came to do, is revealed in these three twin births. So again, as we go down and we talk about Cain and Abel, here's the other thing that happened. And again, if you go down to verse 8, it says, "Cain talked with Abel and his brother, and it came to pass that when they were in the field." So obviously Cain, deceived Abel, and said, "Hey, Abel, come out to the field." Obviously he came into his territory and said, "Hey, I want to talk to you." It didn't really say the details of it. It just says, "And he came to the field." Well, obviously, in the field is where like I said, Cain did all his work. So he probably had a plan set, and he slew Abel at that moment because of his jealousy. He didn't want he didn't want his brother to be favored over God, and he wanted to maintain that birthright, or that favor. And so I guess God's favor, exceeded Eve's favor at that time. So there was a jealousy there. So Abel was slew by Cain, which again, I'm gonna tie this together later on, but just pay attention to it. But what's amazing here too, and I'm gonna point this out later on too, because there's 3 significant twin births, but yet there's a 4th. And again, I'm gonna explain this at the end because I want everybody to see kind of how this thing is playing out. Well, as Cain was cursed by God, he was sent and said, "You are sent away, cursed on you." But God put a mark on him and said, "I'm putting a mark on you. Nobody can touch you. And if anybody touches you, I'll bring, I will bring a curse against them 7-fold." So God still protected Cain, even though he did evil in the sight of the Lord and slew his brother Abel. Cain ended up having a wife, and she bore him a son. And then another son came, and his name was Lamech, and Lamech had a wife named Ada, and also another wife named Zilhah. And Ada gave birth to twins as well. And what's funny is, and again, I'm going to explain this later on, God actually states what the 2 twins' traits were. And I'm going to hypothesize, because some of this is extra biblical as far as like what it could be, and it's really hypothetical. I'm not actually for sure, and there's no biblical backup. It's just something that I think people can resonate with. And again, I'll reveal this at the end of the video. But it says that the first son, which is Jabal, and the second one was Jubal. Jabal lived in tents and raised cattle, and then Jubal played the harp and the organ, so he was a musician, right? And there's a reason why I think God displays this, because it's very important to kind of show a pattern of traits. We always emulate our father or our parents, and so these are traits emulated by parents, or they're emulating the traits of their parents, so to speak. And so I think God is revealing something here that might be a hidden mystery, and I'm going to give you my take on it, but I'm not sure I have biblical backup. I know I don't have biblical backup for some of it, but it's quite interesting to just meditate on this and see what the Lord reveals to you, because he might reveal something different to you than what he did to me. Now, as we pass, that was the first set of twin births. So look at the result of what happened from Cain and Abel, and kind of tuck that away in your memory banks, because next we're gonna read Genesis. I believe it's 20. Here, it's 25. And so in Genesis 25, it speaks of the birth of Jacob and Esau. And Jacob and Esau are, again, the second set of twins that are birthed from this lineage that obviously Jesus is going to be born from, right? Because obviously the bloodline goes from Cain and Abel, and then again, God restored Abel, maybe we'll call it Seth, because that was the bloodline where Noah came out of. So you got to follow the bloodline, and Noah was a righteous man, and I do believe that God holds in high regard, obviously, righteousness to bring his Messiah's bloodline out of. And so Noah, obviously, we all stem from Noah, but even Noah's bloodline had some wickedness in it, which ended up being Ham, as the Bible will say. But I'm fast forwarding quite a bit down now to chapter 25 and talk about Esau and Jacob, and where this birthright situation is coming up again, associated with a twin birth. And so here's what God revealed to me on this one. It's very, very interesting, Because you know how Jesus says in the Gospels, he goes, the least of these is the greatest in heaven. What's funny is the least, the smallest, sometimes the smallest amount of words in a verse, or sometimes the smallest verses or smallest segments of a story are the greatest mysteries of all, which I think is pretty interesting because, again, God says the least of these is the greatest in heaven. And I think some of the greatest mysteries are held in some of the smallest little mentionings inside of a chapter or inside of even a context of a story that God lays out. And because the final mystery is going to tie in to the story of Joseph. But let's go into Esau and Jacob. So Esau and Jacob, when their mother was pregnant, Rebekah was pregnant with him, and the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. So obviously that's talking about 2 nations, two types of people. Really, it's the 2 types of people are light and dark. It's 2 nations. It's God's kingdom and the devil's kingdom, and they are at war. And there's always a travailing and a war going on as these 2 nations are going to war with each other. And that's fighting again for the birthright that God is trying to preserve. And one people shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. Okay? And again, this is also coinciding. The elder shall serve the younger. I believe that's really what God intended it to be originally. That's why Abel was favored over Cain. He was younger because Cain was born first, and God always intended for the younger to serve the older. The younger to rule over the older. And so, Cain didn't like that, so he slew Abel because of that. He didn't want what God's plan was, and he was contrary to God. But here's what's interesting. And when her days were delivered and fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red and hairy garment, and called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out. And here is a great mystery, because this is really going to set in motion what God is about to do in this war of the birthright between light and dark. And his hand took a hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. So notice how it says, and his hand took a hold on Esau's heel. Remember that. And I'm going to reveal something later on in the video, but that's a very significant move. And why would God put that in such a small segment and not explain it out? It basically says Jacob put his hand on Esau's. These were brand new babies, right? They're brand new babies. And what is the significance of Jacob grabbing Esau's heel? It's very important, and it's going to really play out in these mysteries and what God had come to do. And so his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 80 years old when he bare them. And the boys grew up, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field. Here's the other thing. And then again, it shows these traits on what these two boys were coming to do, because God is showing the traits of what his lineage is supposed to be. And it says, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. I believe that the reason why Jesus came from this lineage is Jesus was also a plain man. He was not, even the Bible describes him as not attractive, as far as he was just plain. He was a plain man, very humble, and that kind of shows what Jacob was. And he dwelled in tents, which represents a sojourner in this life. He didn't have his home anywhere. This was not his home. His home was going to be, in heaven. And that's essentially represents Jesus. And it also ties together, and you'll see later on the second set of twin births. It also ties together with Abraham. Abraham was a man of tents as well. And so I think it just shows a trait of where this bloodline of what God kind of intended things to be. So when he shows these traits, it's kind of depicting, some mysteries within the body of that as well. And immediately after this, it shows this, and it says, and the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter and a man of the field. Jacob was a plain man of tents. And Isaac loved Esau. And that's a very significant piece right there. Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob, right? And so when there's a favoritism to one or the other, that's a big thing, because obviously there was favoritism of the Lord over one, and the woman loved the other. It's amazing here how it's in reverse order. Now you have the father, which was Isaac, now favoring the older, and then the mother favoring the younger. And before it was flipped around with the Lord and with Eve. And it said nothing about Adam, which is very interesting. And so Jacob one day saw pottage, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint. So, obviously he was running around hunting, and Esau was very, very hungry this day. Okay. And so Esau said to Jacob, "Feed me, I pray thee, with the same red pottage, for I am faint." And therefore was his name called Edom. And Jacob said, "Sell me this day thy birthright." So here was the struggle of the two nations, and it was all about the birthright. And what's crazy is Esau said, "Behold, I am at the point to die. What shall it be?" And which is pretty, dramatic, because when you think about it, Esau it doesn't say that he went long periods of time without food. He was just faint from the day of chasing down something to hunt. And so it wasn't like God didn't explain that he had gone long periods without food. And there's other times in the Bible where there's long periods without food, fasting and that sort of thing. So he was probably just being very, fickle, wanting food at that given moment. And I guarantee you, Eve was pretty fickle as well when she ate the apple, because guess what? She had plenty of food out there. It's not like she needed to eat the fruit of that tree. But again, this was the deception that the devil came upon and beguiled her, as the Bible says. He tricked her. And so again, Esau says, "I am that at the point to die. What profit of me to keep this birthright?" And Jacob said, "Swear to me this day," and swore to him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob at that moment. So that was he kind of tricked Jacob, because he preyed upon him on a weak moment and basically said, "Hey, you want food? I got food, but I want your birthright. Let's make a deal here." And so he made that deal and stole his birthright at that moment. And so this was a very, very significant moment. And then Jacob gave Esau bread, pottage of lentils, and he did eat, and rose up and went his way. And Esau despised his birthright. And so again, that at that moment was a major chess move of what the Lord came to do. And again, this was always about a birthright. This was always about a birthright, because we were born as the sons of God, and the sons of God are to inherit what God came to do. You know what I mean? And so God wanted to pass down these birthrights, these heirs, these fortunes, these whatever. And so this kind of shows a pattern of what's happening. And again, there is light and there's dark, there's good and there's evil, and you can see it depicted within the traits and within the behaviors of these two nations. And of course, Esau went on to become the Canaanites, and Jacob went on to become the Israelites. And so there's always a war between those two, and you'll see that later on in Genesis. Now, here's the thing. Now we're going to fast forward, and we're going to go to Genesis 38. But I will point out, as we talk about Genesis 38, there's something I'd like to point out. If you notice, in chapter 37 is the beginning of the story of Joseph. And Joseph's story lasted till the end of Genesis, 50 chapters. So this is like 13 verses of the story of Joseph. And, Joseph, had a lot of the traits of what God was looking for as far as righteousness goes, to bring his bloodline and the bloodline of Jesus through. But what's interesting is there is a hard turn. And of course, Judah, obviously, Jesus is depicted as the Lion of Judah. He came from the tribe of Judah. But it would look like at the beginning he would come from the tribe of Joseph, just because Joseph was the younger, and the younger was to rule over the older. But he was such a humble man, and he was such and he had all kinds of wonderful traits, righteous traits that God would probably use as the heir to his birthright. But he didn't. And what's funny is when after they started describing the life of Joseph, so you had these 12 tribes, which tribe, was God going to choose to bring Jesus's bloodline through? And again, it might look like Joseph. And then out of nowhere, God yanks the wheel and puts one singular chapter. It's only one chapter, and it's amazing how the writers of Genesis, or the writer of Genesis, segregated it out in one complete chapter from beginning to end. And again, in chapter 38, and I'm going to read almost the entire chapter because it's so important. There's so many mysteries just within this, because it's the culmination of these 3 twin births that were so significant. And they tell a story, and they show a pattern, and they show a prophecy of what is to come. And it came to pass that Judah went down from his brethren and turned into a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter, a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. And he took her and went in under her, and she conceived. So right there, a Canaanite is a Gentile. They're not even of the Jewish clan. And as you notice, Judah was now a child of Israel, which was Jacob. And so he had Gentile blood right out of the gate. So a lot of times people think that Ruth was where the start of the Gentile blood was, but for Jesus, that Jesus had Gentile blood. But it's so clear in Scripture right here that Jesus's bloodline came from the tribe of Judah, and they bred with a Canaanite woman right here. So it shows that Jesus had Gentile blood right here, which is pretty interesting. But again, Gentile blood or not, God is looking for righteousness. That's where he really wants to give the birthright to righteousness. That's why he chose Abraham. Abraham was the covenant made, right? That's where it's the establishment of that covenant was made there because of his righteousness, right? And it's because he was a friend of God. He had a heart for God. And so God used Abraham and really solidified the old covenant through him. But then there was going to be a second covenant coming, obviously through Jesus and the fulfillment of the old covenant. And so he wanted that covenant bloodline and that birthright to be pure. And so if you notice, he says she conceived 3 sons. This Shua, which was the wife of Judah, she conceived 3 sons. The first one she bare, his name was and she conceived again, and his name was Onan, and she conceived again, and his name was Shelah, when she bare him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. Now, pay attention to Tamar, because she's a very significant character in this chapter. And Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. Notice how it says the Lord slew him. Now, obviously, he could have used man, but maybe the Lord just slew him in some other way. But he destroyed because of his wickedness. The Lord does not want his bloodline, his covenant fulfilled, the line of Judah, to come from a wicked seed. And so he slew that at that point. And so back in those days, when one brother would die, it was the next brother. And even Jesus depicted this in the Gospels, where it's like, hey, whose brother is it in heaven when these 7 brothers die? It was always a tradition where if one brother were to die, the next brother would step up and take a hold of that man's wife and carry the seed on. And so that's exactly what happened here with Tamar. Died, and the next one was Onan. And Onan was to take on Tamar. And Onan, and Judah said unto Onan, go in unto thy brother's wife, and marry her, and raise her up a seed to thy brother. And Onan knew the seed should not be his. And it came to pass, which was disobedient. And when it came to pass, his brother's wife, he spilled the seed on the ground, lest he should give seed to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, which was wicked. He was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him also, it said. And so again, God was trying to preserve his bloodline, purify it. And then said Judah to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow at thy father's house till Shelah. And again, there's a big mystery in Shelah, till Shelah, my son, be grown. And lest peradventure he die, and his brethren did, and Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. So there was a pause, and he said, look, let's wait. Let's pause and wait for Shelah to grow up so that he can take a hold of you and preserve this seed, because he is my third son and the last son of Judah. And so I want my seed. Obviously, Jesus came from this seed. I want it to be preserved. And what's amazing about the name Shelah is it's a derivative of the word Selah. And Selah and Shelah, it means in Hebrew to pause. So you notice there was a pause and waiting for Shelah to grow up to take the hand of Tamar. And also David uses the word Selah in his Psalms, meaning to pause. So it's like he's pausing, waiting on the Lord, and there's a wait to wait on, and the Lord obviously was waiting for righteousness to manifest, to bring a seed. And so I think this is very prophetic, because there was a lot of prophecy too, not only in this verse, this chapter 38, but there was a lot of prophecy fulfilled in the Psalms of David that Jesus did. Like when he was on the cross, Father, forgive me, or he goes, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? That was a psalm. And so Selah kind of ties to that, but it shows a pause, and that's what was done at this moment. And so in that waiting time, in that pause, this is where the devil tried to circumvent what God was doing, which was to preserve the birthright. Okay? And so the Lord was trying to, or the devil was trying to put wickedness within the birthright of what Jesus was coming from. Because obviously the devil knew he was going to be from the tribe of Judah. And so he was like, I'm going to put wickedness in this birthright, in this bloodline. And so that's why God was like, no, you're not. And he slew the two boys, and he was waiting on Shelah to grow up and take the hand of Tamar to keep this bloodline pure. Okay? And again, and it was told Tamar, saying, behold, thy father-in-law goeth into Timnath to shear sheep. And she put her widow's garments off from her, and covered with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place, which is by the way to Timnah, for she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him to wipe. So obviously now Shelah is grown, but she was going to trick, because obviously the devil went in under her, and she was being used to try to trick and steal back this birthright through this trickery, okay? Because she didn't want Shelah to go in under her. But God had different plans, right? God can still make this work, right? And here's how he was going to do it. And when Judah saw her, he thought she to be a harlot, because now she took off these widow's clothes. She put on a veil to cover her face, and he couldn't recognize her because all he could see was the eyes. And this was the trick. So obviously there was another trick here recently in the last verse. We noticed that trick, and now this trick was trying to come back. And so watch the trickery that's going on here. And so Judah saw her, and he thought to be her a harlot, because she had covered her face. And he turned to her by the way and says, go, I pray thee, and let thee come into her. For he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. Because if he knew his daughter-in-law, he wouldn't have done it. But really, Judah was acting unrighteous by taking this harlot to begin with. But she said, what will thou give me? What are you going to give me for basically my services, so to speak? And he said, I will give you a kid from the flock. Wilt thou give me a pledge, and wilt thou send it? And she said, what will I pledge thee? How about thy signet, the bracelet, and the staff? So he gave her a signet, a bracelet, and a staff. And he gave it to her, and she came in under her, and she conceived by him. And she arose and went and went away and laid by her veil from her and put out the garments from her widowhood. And Judah sent the kid by the hand of his friend the Adullamite to receive the pledge from the woman's hand and found her not. So she absconded. She took off, and basically she was pregnant at this time. And so it came to pass that 3 months later, it was told to Judah, saying, tomorrow thy daughter-in-law hath played the harlot. And so now this whole trickery has been revealed. And also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, bring her forth and let her be burnt. And so, he was trying to cover up his sins of what he did and to punish her for her trickery. But again, God had a plan for Tamar, and had a plan for this child that was within her, or that was supposed to be born through her, to preserve the seed of Judah. And Judah was tricked, and then obviously he was trying to do away with covering his own sins, and was gonna burn her. And so when she brought forth, she sent him into his father-in-law, saying, by this man, who are these? And I am with child. And she said, discern, I pray thee, who are these, the signet, the bracelet, and the staff? And Judah acknowledged them, said, oh, they're mine. And then at this point, and here's the pivotal move right here. It says, she had been more righteous than I, because I gave her not to Shelah my son, and he knew her again no more. So it shows, again, this preservation of righteousness for the birthright that God was coming to do. But the pivotal move comes in these last few verses, and what it really shows of what God has planned. And it came to pass in the time of her travail. So again, there's always travailing in birth and this war that goes on within the belly. And again, and behold, twins were in her womb. So they didn't know that until the time of her travail. So she had great travail going on, because now there's a fighting, there's a war. Obviously, there was some more trickery. Now you have twins, and these twins throughout history. You got Cain and Abel going to war, and one killed the other. Then you got Jacob and Esau. They were at odds, and they were always going to war. And they went to war in the belly, and then they warred over the birthright. There was this war going on between these two twins. And that's really not indicative of twins, especially in today's society. Twins are always extremely close. What's funny is that I have twins, and maybe God revealed this to me because I have twins. I don't know. It really stuck out to me when I read these verses, and so maybe there's a correlation there. I don't know. But twins are inherently close, but it's so interesting how these twins are depicted as a war, because really what it's showing these twins is the war between dark and light. And so here's the culmination of this. And it came to pass that when she travailed, that she put one of his hand, that the one put out his hand. So here is the first baby coming out of the womb, and he put forth his hand, right? And here's the significant move. And the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, this came out first. They do that again because they're trying to depict where the birthright is going to go. Because if they both come out, people will be like, obviously, probably the father is not in the room because they had a midwife doing it. So it's like there could be some deception there. Who knows? But back then, I guess they were tying a scarlet on the one that's born first, so that they can know who's going to get the birthright. So when they name them, they will name the one that is the firstborn, because if they're twins, they're obviously, it's the same seed divided, so to speak. But one has to be the older of the two. And even if it's just minutes older, that's the one that's going to get the birthright. Obviously, that's depicted in Cain and Abel. It's depicted in Jacob and Esau. So upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, this came out first. And that's verse 28 in chapter 38. And again, there's only 2 verses left in this story. And then the whole story of Judah ends, and it goes right back into Joseph, which is very interesting. And they didn't carve out any other of the 12 sons of Israel and tell any other story. It was just this one chapter. Then it goes right back in and then tells the story of Joseph throughout and his blessings at the end and all that kind of stuff. So take a hold of, this is what happened. And in verse 29, it came to pass as he drew back his hand. So now the hand came out. They tied a scarlet out saying, this is the first one. Then all of a sudden, this hand of the baby drew back. And behold, his brother came out. And she said, how hast thou broken forth? This breach be upon thee. Therefore, his name was called Pharez. Which, if you look at the Hebrew name of Pharez, it was to breach forth, right? That's why they named him Pharez, to breach forth his hand. And so he overtook his brother, even though he was going to be the younger of the two, because it was God's plan for the younger to rule over the older. That's where the birthright, even though man wanted birthright, man, which is flesh, wants to give the birthright to the oldest by default. God wants to give it to that of righteousness. He cares about righteousness more than he cares about tradition. Does that make sense? Does that play a little story maybe back in future chapters of the Bible? He cares about the heart. He cares about righteousness. It's not about man's tradition of the first being the birthright and all this kind of stuff. So, how hast thou broken forth? So breach be upon thee, therefore his name is called Pharez. And afterward came out his brother and had that scarlet thread upon his hand. And his name was called Zerah. And so that ends the story, which is amazing. So never again was Pharez and Zerah mentioned. But let me mention this to you. Okay, and actually it was mentioned again, and I'll show you that in the etymology of Matthew. In Matthew, it's the very first 3 verses of Matthew were the only other time that Pharez and Zerah were mentioned. And it's interesting that Pharez's name in Hebrew means to breach forth, means to basically, he'd be breached forth. He came out first. He overtook his brother who had his hand out first. It was like, I won the race. No, I'm pulling it back. Boom. Now I put my hand out first. And so this victory of his brother is a very big depiction. And I'm going to show you here in a minute what all this means. But Zerah, which is very interesting, in Hebrew, it means foreign and unauthorized. Unauthorized. Isn't that an amazing name for Zerah? And Zerah was the one that had the scarlet around the wrist. It was supposed to be the birthright, but it was the unauthorized birthright because Jesus came from the lineage of Pharez. And if you notice in Matthew 1, verses 3, it talks about these 3 birthrights, right? Or this, not these 3 birthrights, this birthright of Jesus in the lineage of where it came down. And so we'll turn to Matthew 1 in the New Testament. And it says, Abraham begat Isaac, Isaac begat Jacob, Jacob begat Judas, which was Judah, his brother, and Judah begat Pharez and Zerah of Tamar. And then it says, and Pharez begat Esrom, and Esrom begat Aram, and so on and on and on, because that lineage came from Pharez, not from Zerah. It showed that there was twins in that lineage. It's interesting that Matthew mentioned both those twins. You know what I mean? But yet he didn't mention the twins with Jacob. Isn't that interesting? He didn't mention, and Isaac, or it says, and Isaac begat Jacob and Esau. Why was that not mentioned? Isn't that interesting? There was 3 sets of twins that really are significant to show what Jesus came to do, but yet Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob and Esau. Why wasn't Esau mentioned in that one? Because he stole the birthright at that point. But then again, riddle me this, why was Pharez and Zerah mentioned? But then it says Pharez begat Esrom. So it shows the lineage, even though those 2. And so here's what the Lord revealed to me. And what's funny is this mystery was given to me, and I thought I kind of had it understood. And I started to kind of explain it to some people. But then one day I started to pray, and I was just praying my normal prayer in the morning. Not my normal prayer, but I was praying to the Lord in the morning, as I do every morning. And as I was praying, the Lord, while I was talking to him, and I wasn't even on this topic with him, he just drilled and revealed to me what these three births actually meant. And it just absolutely flattened me. And I was like, wow. Obviously there's three births of twins. So 3 is an extremely significant number in obviously all the Bible. And so 33, the number 3, 12, 40, all that kind of stuff, all these numbers mean a lot of things. And as we know, Jesus, was 3 days in the grave. So here's the mystery that the Lord revealed to me. Number 1 is, and take account this too. This is part of the Torah. This is the first book of the Torah, Genesis. This was always been revealed to the Jews. Just imagine how many thousands of years this story, this book has been around, and it's always been there for the Jews to see. And a lot of times people say that, the prophecy of Jesus was a lot in the book of Isaiah, which is way further down the line. And I know there's other prophecies, obviously, in Psalms and things of that nature. But here was the original prophecy of Jesus right here in these 3 twin births. Number 1, Cain and Abel. This was a fight of the birthright. Cain slew Abel, right? Death of Jesus. He died, right? That was day 1. Jesus was crucified. Day 2, second twin births. This is when Jesus had left and went down into the bowels of the earth. This is where Jesus defeated the devil. Oftentimes we say Jesus defeated the devil. Well, how did he defeat the devil? Because the devil's still alive. And oftentimes in battles, defeat is in the form of death. But you can't kill in the spirit realm. So obviously the devil's not dead. So then how did Jesus defeat the devil, right? And so I think he defeated him, and this second battle of the twins represents how God defeated the devil. And again, I'm gonna even back it up again in Colossians 2, verse 15. And so earmark that in your Bible, because it's also another verse that I think is going to basically show what God came to do. And so in Colossians 2:15, it talks about how God made a show of them over principalities and powers. He made a show of them. How does somebody make a show of them, or just make a mockery of somebody, so to speak? And I would say if God was going to defeat the devil, he was going to make a mockery of the devil by tricking him, right? So if you notice in the second twin birth, that was the second day of the 3 days. 3 twin births, 3 days. The first day was the death. The second day was Jesus going into the bowels of the earth, releasing all of his children, right? He released those children to where they could be free, go up to heaven. And he tricked the devil and set them free. He tricked them. That's how he made a show of them. Just like Esau tricked the devil. He tricked Esau, so to speak. He tricked him and stole the birthright. And so those people that Jesus released was the birthright. Those were his inheritors of the kingdom. And so Jesus went down there, made a show of the devil, tricked him, because he didn't defeat him by killing him, because he's still alive to this day and allowed to walk around the earth. So he tricked him in hell and took back the power. He took back the power at that moment from the devil. And again, the devil tried to come back and trick him again, didn't he? And that's the show in the third birth. So in the third twin birth, it shows that the devil tried to trick Judah and mess up that bloodline with impure blood. But God did not allow that trick to happen. They were going to burn Tamar and all this kind of stuff. And obviously they had, the devil tricked Judah. But because Tamar acted righteous, Judah said, "You are more righteous than me." God was able to preserve his seed, the seed of David, the seed of Judah, the line of Judah, through that righteous act, because Judas said, you are more righteous than me. And so then, boom, the war again between the two twins, and the older was going to try to come out first. That was the devil, like, no, I'm going to breach through. I'm going to make it first. They tied the skull around, and God's like, nah. And Pharez took that arm, and Pharez was going to be the victor, rising from the grave on the third day. He breached forth, right? Breached forth. And Jesus breached forth and defeated death, rose from the grave. And that's what that depiction was with that third childbirth. So that is really the mystery of the three twin births, is the death, the burial, the second day when God made a show of the devil. He defeated the devil, tricked him, stole the birthright back. And then the last one, even though the devil came back to try to trick and steal it back again, God wasn't having it. He totally circumvented what the devil was trying to do, and to steal that birthright through Zerah. And he pulled back that arm, and the true lineage, the true birthright of Jesus breached forth, just like when God defeated the devil, he defeated death on the third day and rose and breached forth from the grave. And that's what the three twin births mystery is. And what's interesting too, is if you notice in Genesis chapter 4, it also mentioned a fourth set of twins, but it doesn't show of any kind of war of them. And I think it's, and so the twins depicted in Genesis chapter 4 shows these twins that came from Cain. And I really believe that God was saying this, it doesn't matter if, I could, if I wanted to, I could have taken the birthright through Cain if I wanted to. I think really that's what that means. He's like, Lamech, which came from Cain, had twins through his wife, Ada. And Ada had twins, Jabal and Jubal. And again, in that Jabal and Jubal depiction, one was a man of tents and raised cattle, and the other was that of music, liked to play the harp and the organ, right? And we could hypothesize maybe that the man of tents that's what Abraham was, a man of tents. That's what Jacob was, a plain man of tents, right? And I believe that God is basically saying, look, here's a trait of this bloodline. And I could make this bloodline if I wanted to out of Cain, because Cain was part of Adam and Eve, and that was the original sons of God. And I could make the bloodline if I wanted to out of this wicked murderer, you know what I mean? And he showed that depiction that he could do it, because the other one was a man of music. And although I can't scripturally back this up, there's people have always said that the devil led music, was an angel of music, and was in charge of all the music in heaven. There's no biblical backup for that, but it's interesting that in that second twin, which I think God was showing the two different birthrights in that what he could have done. I could take it here, because look, this is a man of tents and this is a man of music, and that could maybe have just represented the evil nation, or the evil kingdom, the kingdom of darkness, and the kingdom of light was a man of tents, the sojourner in life. Abraham, Jacob ties all into that lineage. But again, that's just hypothetical, but it's interesting that nothing was ever spoken again of those two twins. It didn't show any war between them. It just showed that little differentiator between those two. And then again, God brought forth Seth, which is the lineage of Noah. The earth was completely destroyed. And so everything was started all over again with Noah. And from Noah came Abraham, and came Isaac and Jacob and all that kind of stuff. So that was the birthright. And again, this was always about the birthright. And we are the sons of God. It says that in the New Testament. And we are going to be co-heirs. And obviously a son inherits that of his father. So that's why we are called co-heirs with Christ. We are the sons of God. And, it says that all throughout the New Testament, that we are sons, not servants, but sons, right? And that's what Jesus came to do, is to take back the original birthright that God had always intended, because we are the sons of God, but there's two nations, and there's still two seeds on this planet, And there are those that are going to be sons of God, and those are going to be the sons of the enemy, so to speak. And not everybody's going to choose God, but there are those that are selected, that are elected for that birthright. And these are the sons of God, and this is what God came to do. And this was always in Genesis, and it was always a mystery that God had there, that what he came to do and what he had intended to do through Jesus right out of the gate, starting in chapter 4 of Genesis. And it's so amazing, and it was just an amazing revelation that the Lord gave me, and I hope everybody is edified from this, and that it just completely blows your hair back, because it didn't mine, and I don't even have hair. So to God be the glory. Thank you for letting me share this with you today. Please share this with others. And if you have any comments, please put them in the comment box below. I'd love to hear whether you agree or disagree with this, because it really does tie together and all of what Jesus came to do, and that Jesus was always in the plan, and he was always come to be our Redeemer. Amen.